I noticed the story needs to be around 5,000 words. That's quite substantial for a chat response. Let me write it directly here. I knew something was wrong the moment he laughed at her joke. Not because the joke wasn't funny. It was. My daughter has always had that dry maritime humor, the kind that sneaks up on you. But he laughed half a second too late, like he'd been watching her face to know when to react. I filed that away and said nothing. That's what I do. I was a school vice principal for 22 years in Fredericton. You learn to watch before you speak. My name is Audrey. I'm 63 years old. I live in the same 2-story house on Waterloo Row that my late husband Gord and I bought in 1991, the year our daughter was born. Gord passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The house is mine now, fully paid. The kind of asset you don't talk about at dinner parties, but everyone knows you have. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter, because that's who she is to me, the whole of her, not just a name, is 34. She works in healthcare administration at the Dr. Everett Chalmers Hospital. She's careful and principled, and she has her father's eyes. After her marriage ended in 2021, 2 years, no children, an amicable split she still won't talk about in detail, she spent 1.5 years rebuilding herself. Yoga, cooking classes, a solo trip to Cape Breton that she said changed something in her. She met him at a friend's birthday gathering in Moncton. He was visiting from out west. Calgary, he said, though he was vague about the specifics. His name was Warren Ashby, 46 years old, well-dressed in that careful way that isn't quite natural, the way men dress when they've studied how to dress rather than just knowing. He had an easy smile and the kind of tan you get from standing outside at the right moments rather than working in it. My daughter called me that Sunday and I could hear something new in her voice. Lighter. Cautious about being too light. I was happy for her. I want to be clear about that. I was genuinely, completely happy for her. She'd been lonely in a way she'd never say out loud, and I'd watched it the way mothers watch things, from a careful distance, saying nothing, carrying it alone. Warren drove up to Fredericton 3 weeks later to meet me. He brought flowers, Gerbera daisies, which are cheerful and impersonal, and a bottle of Riesling from a Niagara winery I actually like, which told me he'd done some research. He shook my hand with both of his. He complimented the house. Then, about 40 minutes into dinner, he said, "This place must be worth a lot now with the market the way it's been." I looked at him. I smiled. I said the market had been something, hadn't it? And I changed the subject to hockey. My daughter didn't notice. She was pouring wine. But I noticed, and I sat with it. Over the following weeks, I kept meeting Warren. He drove up on weekends. He was attentive to my daughter in ways that looked right, opened car doors, remembered she didn't like cilantro, texted her back quickly. He was good at the performance of a good man. I know that sounds uncharitable. I tried to talk myself out of the feeling more than once. I have a friend, Beverly, who lives 2 streets over, and I called her one evening in March and said, "Bev, I think I might just be one of those mothers." The difficult kind, the suspicious kind. Bev said, "You've never been that kind, Audrey. Trust what you're noticing." The second time the house came up, we were sitting in my backyard in late April. The lilacs were just coming in. Gord planted them the spring we moved in, and they've grown into a wall along the back fence. Warren was quiet for a moment, looking at the yard, and then he said, "You must have a lot tied up in this property. Do you have it in a trust or just outright?" I set down my tea. I said, "Just outright." He nodded like I'd told him something useful. That night, after they'd driven back to my daughter's apartment, she had a place on York Street, a 10-minute walk from me. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I looked up Warren Ashby, Calgary. The results were thin in a way that felt deliberate. A LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in 3 years. A mention in a community newsletter from Red Deer that I couldn't access. Nothing that told me who he really was. I called my lawyer the next morning. Her name is Constance, and she's been my family solicitor since before Gord died. She helped me set up the estate, update my will, all of it. I told her I had a situation I wanted to talk through. She said come in Thursday. I didn't tell my daughter I was going. I want to explain something about the months that followed because I think people hear a story like this and they imagine the mother as a detective, calculating, suspicious, running some kind of operation. It wasn't like that. It was more like being cold for a long time and not being able to get warm. The worry sat in my chest like a stone I'd swallowed. I went to work. I had Bev over for dinner. I went to my yoga class on Tuesday mornings at the YMCA. And underneath all of it, all the time, I was paying attention. In May, Warren mentioned, casually, the way someone mentioned something they've been thinking about for a while, that he was looking at investing in a property in New Brunswick, maybe the Kennebeckasis Valley. He said real estate in Ontario and BC was impossible, that the Maritimes were still reasonable. He asked if I knew anyone in property management. I said I didn't, and I watched his face when I said it. In June, my daughter told me they were talking about moving in together. She was happy. She told me over the phone, walking home from work, and I could hear the city sounds around her, the bus, someone's dog, and her voice was that lighter thing again, the thing I'd been afraid to hope for her. I told her that was wonderful. I asked how she was feeling about it. She said, I know it's fast, but he makes me feel like everything's going to be okay. I said, that's a beautiful feeling, sweetheart. And I meant it, and I was also afraid. The first thing Constance told me, back in the spring, was simple. Make sure nothing changes in your estate documents without you explicitly deciding to change it. She said in situations like this, and she'd seen a few, she was careful not to alarm me, the concern was less about dramatic fraud and more about slow erosion. A name added here. A joint account open there. Decisions that feel like trust and turn out to be transfers. I asked her about power of attorney. She said, don't give it to anyone you've known less than a decade and not without a full independent review. I said I understood. She also, gently, suggested I keep a record. Dates, conversations, things said about the house or money. Not because I'd necessarily need it, but because memory is fallible and documentation isn't. I started keeping a small notebook in my desk drawer. Nothing dramatic, just dates and notes. July 4th, Warren asked again about the Waterloo Row market, said a friend of his had sold a comparable property on Church Street for $620,000. I confirmed nothing. July 19th, he mentioned he was between projects in Calgary and might base himself in Fredericton for a while. Asked if I knew any good financial advisors in the area. By August, he was staying at my daughter's apartment 4 or 5 nights a week. He'd met a few of her friends. He'd been to her work summer barbecue. He was embedding himself in her life with the patient efficiency of someone who had a plan. The thing my daughter didn't know, the thing I hadn't told her because I didn't want to shadow what she had, was that I'd made some calls. A contact of mine from the school board, a woman named Helen who'd moved to Calgary for her husband's work years ago, still had friends there. I asked her, as casually as I could, if the name Warren Ashby meant anything in Calgary business circles. She asked around. It took 2 weeks. What she found wasn't criminal. It was a pattern. A woman in her late 50s, widowed, comfortable. A relationship that lasted about 18 months. A joint investment in a vacation property in BC that the woman had put most of the money into. The relationship ended. The property dispute dragged on for over a year. The woman had eventually sold her share at a loss just to be done with it. I sat with that information for 3 days before I decided what to do with it. I didn't go to my daughter with an accusation. I know mothers who have done that, who have arrived at their child's door with a folder of evidence and a speech. And I know what it cost them, what it cost the relationship. My daughter was 34, not 14. She had the right to make her own choices. What she didn't have was the information I had. I invited them both for Thanksgiving dinner in October, just us 3. I cooked everything Gord used to make, the bread stuffing with sage and celery, the maple glazed carrots, the butter tarts from my mother-in-law's recipe. I set the table with the good dishes. I opened a decent Pinot Noir. I wanted it to feel like trust. During dinner, Warren was warm and easy and funny. He talked about growing up in Medicine Hat, about working in project management for infrastructure contracts, about wanting to put down roots somewhere that felt like a real community rather than just a city. He was good. I'll say it again. He was genuinely good at this. After dinner, while my daughter was wrapping up leftovers in the kitchen, Warren and I sat at the table with our wine. And I asked him, directly and pleasantly, about the woman in Calgary. I said her name, the name Helen had given me. He went very still. I said I wasn't looking to cause a scene. I said I'd found out the way mothers find things out, through years of knowing how to ask questions sideways. I said I wasn't going to pretend the information didn't exist. And then I said something I'd rehearsed because I wanted to get it right. I've spent 30 years building a life in this house, and I spent 22 years watching children learn who they were. I know when someone is teaching and when someone is performing. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "She misrepresented what happened." I said, "Maybe, but you were there for both conversations." My daughter came back from the kitchen before he could answer. She looked at our faces. She asked if everything was okay. I said, "We were just talking. The butter tarts are ready, I think." She didn't know that night. I want to be honest about the timeline. I didn't tell her that night, and I've thought about that choice many times since. Part of me still isn't sure I made the right call, but I decided, sitting with Constance, sitting with Bev, sitting alone with myself, that I wanted to know more before I asked my daughter to bear the weight of what I knew. November passed. Warren pulled back slightly, not dramatically, just the small recalibration of someone who'd been caught off balance and needed to regroup. He visited less. When he did, he was still warm, but the questions about the house stopped. I didn't know if that was strategic or if my Thanksgiving conversation had genuinely rattled him. And then, in late November, my daughter called me from the parking lot of her office. I could hear she'd been crying. She said, "Mom, I need to tell you something." I said, "I'm right here. Tell me." She said she'd found something on Warren's laptop. She'd needed to print a document for work. Her printer was broken, and he'd left his laptop open. She wasn't snooping. The browser was open. There was an email thread, and she'd caught her own name in it, and she'd read it before she understood what she was reading. It was a conversation with someone she didn't know, a man, from the email address. The thread was about property in New Brunswick. Specifically, it discussed the likelihood of a partner's existing assets being consolidated before a possible marriage, and the best timing for a prenuptial agreement that would protect, and this was the word that had stopped her, access. She read me the line over the phone. Her voice was flat in the way that means someone is keeping it flat on purpose. I sat down. I was standing at my kitchen counter, and I sat down at the table, very slowly. I said, "Sweetheart, I need to tell you some things." I told her everything. The notebook, Helen's calls, the woman in Calgary, the Thanksgiving conversation, all of it. I told her in the voice I'd used for 22 years when I had to tell a student or a parent something that was going to hurt, and there was no way to make it not hurt. She was quiet for a long time when I finished. Then she said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Since the spring." "Pieces of it." She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And that was the right question, the fair question. I said, "Because I didn't want to be wrong, and because I didn't want you to have to carry it until I was sure. I was trying to protect you, and I think I didn't want to take something from you before I had to." She said, "Mom." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm not angry at you. I need a minute." I gave her the minute. I sat at the table and looked at Gord's photo on the sideboard, and I thought about what he would have done. He would have gone over there. He was that kind of man. I didn't go over there. I waited. She called back in 40 minutes. Her voice was different, cleaner, the way a sky looks after it storms. She said, "I ended it. He's getting his things. I asked him to leave." I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "No, but I will be. Mum, I would have married him." I said, "I know." She said, "He asked me last week." I said I needed time to think. I think I already knew something, I just didn't know what. That's the part that stays with me. She already knew something, the same way I had. The language the body uses before the mind catches up. The hesitation, the question you don't ask, the laugh that comes half a second too late. Warren was gone from her apartment by the end of that week. There was one phone call from him to me. He had my number from the dinners, in which he was cold and briefly threatening in a way that told me his warmth had always been a costume. I recorded the call. I sent the recording to Constance. She sent him a letter. I never heard from him again. What followed was quieter and slower and, in many ways, harder than the drama of those months. My daughter took a leave from work in December, just 2 weeks, just to breathe. I drove her to Moncton to see an old university friend. We stopped at Tim Hortons twice on the way we always used to when she was small, and we talked about everything except Warren for most of the drive. Then, somewhere around Sussex, she said, "I keep thinking about what I missed." I said, "You didn't miss it, you felt it. You just didn't have the words for it yet." She looked out the window for a while. Then she said, "Did Dad ever make you feel like that? Like you could just trust your own gut?" I said, "Every single day. That was the main thing he did." She smiled at the window. Not a big smile, the kind that means something. There's something I want to say to anyone listening to this, because I've thought about it a lot in the months since. The conversation about money in a relationship, about property, about what belongs to whom, about protecting what you've spent a lifetime building. That conversation isn't unromantic, it isn't suspicious, it is the most basic act of taking yourself seriously. Gord and I talked about money from the beginning. We had a joint account and we had individual accounts. I kept my name on this house from the day we bought it. We had wills done before our daughter started school. None of that meant we didn't trust each other. It meant we were adults who respected each other enough to be honest. I am 63 years old. I have a house on Waterloo Row and a retirement portfolio that Gord and I built together over 30 years, and I keep it in my name with my lawyer's number on speed dial, and I am not ashamed of any of that. I am also my daughter's mother. And that job, it turns out, doesn't end when they're grown. It just changes shape. She called me last Sunday. She sounded good. Not performed good. Actually good. The kind that comes from the inside out. She's been seeing a therapist. She's taken up running, which she's always hated, and she says she's starting to not hate it. She asked if I wanted to come for dinner this week. She said she'd make the pasta I taught her, the one with the lemon and the capers. I said I'd be there Thursday. I'll bring the Riesling. The Niagara one, because it's actually good wine, and I refuse to let Warren Ashby ruin a good Niagara Riesling. Some things you keep. I've been thinking, in the months since all of this settled, about what the word instinct actually means. People use it loosely. They say trust your gut the way they say have a good day, reflexively, without really meaning it as instruction. But I think instinct is something you earn. It's built from paying attention over a long time, from watching people carefully and honestly, without deciding what you want to see first. I didn't know Warren was dangerous the night he laughed half a second too late. I just noticed. And noticing, it turned out, was enough to start. What I've come to understand about the whole situation is that nothing Warren did was accidental. Every question about the house, every casual mention of the market, every warm handshake with both hands, it was architecture. He was building something and he was patient about it, and if I had been less attentive or more eager to be liked, he would have kept building until the foundation was his. That's how it works, I think. Not with dramatic moves, but with small ones. A door left open here. A name on a document there. The slow accumulation of access dressed up as love. My daughter did nothing wrong. I want to say that plainly because I think women in her position, in the position of having loved someone who turned out to be a performance, carry a shame that doesn't belong to them. She was open. She was hopeful. She gave someone the benefit of the doubt, the way a person does when they've already survived one hard thing and they're ready to believe the next chapter will be kinder. That's not naivety. That's courage, actually. The kind that takes more nerve than suspicion ever does. What protected us in the end wasn't luck. It was the habit of taking ourselves seriously. I kept my name on my house because Gord and I decided early that love and legal clarity aren't opposites. I called Constance because I'd learned over 63 years that naming a worry out loud makes it smaller and more manageable. I kept the notebook because documentation is just memory you can trust. None of those things felt like vigilance at the time. They just felt like sense. The hardest part of the whole year wasn't Warren. It was the conversation in the car on the way to Moncton, when my daughter asked me why I hadn't told her sooner. That question is going to sit with me for a long time, and I'm not sure I have a clean answer for it. I was trying to protect her, and I was also, if I'm honest, trying to protect what she had. The lightness in her voice, the hope. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe the right thing was always to hand her the information and trust her to decide what to do with it. She's 34. She's earned that trust. What I know is this. The people who try to take from us count on us being too polite to notice, too grateful to question, too afraid of seeming difficult to say the thing out loud. Warren counted on all three of those. He miscalculated. And that miscalculation started the night I looked at him across my dinner table and decided that my discomfort mattered more than his comfort. That's the whole thing, really. Your discomfort matters. What you notice matters. The question you're afraid to ask out loud is usually the most important one. And the life you've built, slowly, honestly, year by year, is worth every awkward conversation it takes to keep it. My daughter is running now. She hates it, and she's doing it anyway. I think that's the bravest kind of thing.